In this video, we're going to talk about the Playback engine. So go into the Setups menu, choose Playback engine, and this is where you're going to have quite a few options for setting up how your system's going to perform. You can think of this window as basically how you're going to devote the code to certain tasks for recording and playing back. Now, in this particular window, I have something different than what maybe you'll be seeing. In the current engine, for example, I have the choices of choosing which engine I want to work with. Let's not discuss that right now because that's more on aspects of Pro Tools 9. But in Pro Tools 8, you should not be seeing that option at all. So we will get into that further on in discussions. We will also talk about this window in more detail as we start getting into the recording aspects of Pro Tools also. So the first drop-down menu that I want to discuss is probably the most important one. This determines the amount of short-term data storage for real-time processing. So this affects overall processing for everything in the system. The lower you go, the less time the system has to spit the data out correctly. You crank it up into higher samples, you're giving it more time, more short-term storage for processing audio. There's benefits for one and the other. Going to short-term storage allows you to have input data go directly out as fast as possible with the least amount of latency. So this is excellent for recording. But when you're going into editing and have a lot of things going on, you may have to crank your buffers up. As you start adding more plugins, you start getting more into the mix aspects of the program, you will find yourself cranking up the short-term storage for real-time processing. So we will again discuss that in more detail as we start going into other aspects of the program in the month. The next drop-down box is the host processing. This determines how many multi-core processors you have on your machine, as well as it tells you how many do you want to devote to real-time aspects in the application. Now, why you would want to drop this down? Well, if you have a video application running in the background, or you have some other CPU-intensive app that needs to be higher priority, then you may need to simply just drop down your processor to half or 1. You just won't be able to do as much processing for your plugins specifically inside the application. Now, CPU usage limit is very similar. This allows you to basically put a governor, if you want to call it, on the application so it prevents the software from utilizing the entire processor. You may find that you're using other applications in the background that need priority as well. Again, the example is video editing application. Otherwise, you typically want to keep that cranked when you're running Pro Tools by itself. Now, the ignore errors during playback and record. What this does is Pro Tools has a unique advantage in preventing any pops or clicks in the playback or recording of audio when this is turned off. Now, why you would ever want to have this turned on is if you're not dealing with any crucial recording or playback options. You're simply doing editing and you're just needing to get through some editing aspects while the system is requiring a lot of CPU processing. But when you are mixing down or you are recording, it's highly advised that you do not have this feature turned on. You will lose quality in the recording and the playback aspects when that is turned on. So be careful about that. Now, DAE playback buffer, this determines the amount of buffer that you're getting from your hard drive. So think of this as the short-term data storage for information coming from an external storage medium. So you may have a FireWire drive, a SCSI, or more likely you're going to have the serial ATA drives now. This allows you to have more tracks playing at once, possibly with higher edit densities. In other words, more edits happening at once throughout the session. If you have a slower drive or your drive is reaching full capacity, you may find yourself having to crank that up in order to get the performance out of your drive. You will also notice as you crank that up that you're requiring your system to go through the whole motions of storing a lot of information before it even can begin to play it back. So you'll get some sluggish behavior from the application. So it's always recommended to have fast, high-performance drives so that you can prevent messing with your disk buffers. Now, your cache size actually determines how your elastic audio processes are going to be utilized. We will discuss elastic audio in further chapters, but basically it requires CPU processing just like any other aspect. But if you have issues with your elastic audio not running smoothly, you may want to crank that up to have larger performance. Otherwise, you can keep it at normal or drop it down below if you have to. Now, you may not have this option show up in your software. So the plugin streaming buffer is for sample-based plugins. So for example, you may be familiar with ESX24 in Logic. Well, Pro Tools has something very similar. It's called Structure. Structure does the same concepts. You have sample playback, you have a lot of sample editing. In order for the sample aspects to run efficiently with the amount of buffer that is needed, you can set that by determining these levels right here. So if you're not working with any sample-based plugins, you really don't have to worry about this particular drop-down box. Again, we will talk about this window in more detail in further courses. There's a lot to learn, a lot to understand, and a lot of troubleshooting that comes along with this window.